I take myself for a guy who is pretty skeptical about the paranormal, but after what had happened to me, I honestly don't know what to think of anymore. I still can't explain it, and even now, years later, it still bothers me every time I think about it. So this happened back in 2018. It was a regular Thursday, middle of the week, and I was on my way to work. I was in my usual routine, same drive, same coffee shop, same route. That day though, I was running a little late, which was weird for me. I'm usually pretty on time, but my alarm had glitched or something, and I woke up like 20 minutes later than usual. I had this off feeling all morning, like I was moving slower than usual. I work about 20 minutes from where I live, and I know the drive so well that I barely think about it anymore. But that day, when I got in my car, I noticed something strange right off the bat. The clock on my car's dashboard was showing the wrong time. It was about 30 minutes fast, which made no sense because it had always been perfectly in sync with my phone. I didn't want to stress about it, so I shrugged it off, figuring I'd fix it later. I started driving and everything was pretty normal for the first few blocks. But when I got to the main intersection that I usually take, I noticed something that really threw me. The light was green, but no cars were moving. Usually this road is packed with the morning traffic, but there was nothing. Not a single car, not even a pedestrian. I live in a busy city and that part of the route is always jammed. I didn't think much of it and just kept driving, figuring maybe there was an accident up ahead or something. As I drove down the street, I realized it wasn't just that intersection. Every single street was empty. No cars, no people, no nothing. It was like a ghost town. I thought it was a little weird, but I figured maybe there was some kind of traffic accident or road closure. The strange part was how quiet it was, like there was no sound at all. Usually, even if there aren't any cars, there's noise in this city. Construction, birds, wind, something. But it was dead silent. I could feel this weird sensation like I was totally alone, and I felt this chill around down my spine. Then, when I turned down the next street, I noticed something even stranger. My usual coffee shop, the one I stop at every day without fail, wasn't there. I swear it wasn't there. Instead, there was this weird empty lot, like a space where buildings should be, but nothing was there. I remember thinking I must have made a wrong turn, so I pulled over to check my phone GPS just to be sure. When I opened the map, I was shocked. It showed I was on the right street, but the coffee shop was marked there, even though it clearly wasn't. It didn't make any sense. I kept looking at my phone and back at the empty lot, trying to figure out if I was losing my mind. I thought maybe the place had closed down overnight and they'd already cleared it out, but that seemed impossible. I was there just the day before. I tried calling one of my coworkers to see if they were having a weird day too, but I couldn't get a signal. My phone kept saying no service, which was odd because I'd always had perfect reception on that road. At this point I was starting to feel a bit freaked out. I was still late and the street felt more and more unfamiliar even though I'd driven it 1,000 times. I decided to head straight to the office, thinking maybe I'd figure it out once I got there. But when I finally arrived, the whole parking lot was empty. I'm usually one of the last ones to arrive and the lot is always full by the time I get there. But that morning it was just me. No cars, no people. The whole building was dark. I was starting to think I was having a nightmare. I went up to the front door and it was locked. I checked my watch and it said 8:45 AM. Our office opens at 8, so people should have been there. I was completely baffled. I tried to text my boss, but the phone still had no service. I stood there for a few minutes, just staring at the door, trying to wrap my head around what was going on. I was debating whether to just go back home and call in sick when out of nowhere, a car pulled up behind me. It was an old silver sedan that I didn't recognize, but the driver was staring at me like he knew me. He rolled down his window and just kind of smirked, saying, "Are you lost?" I remember feeling super uncomfortable. There was something off about the way he looked at me, almost like he was amused or like he knew something I didn't. I tried to brush it off and just said, "No, I'm just fine, just running late." He nodded, but he kept staring. Then he just said, "You should be more careful." And with that, he drove off. The whole encounter left me feeling unsettled, but I tried to shake it off. I waited outside the office for a bit, but no one showed up. Eventually, I gave up and decided to just head home. When I got back in my car, I realized that the dashboard clock was now showing the right time, but my phone was still showing no service. I decided to head home and figure out what was going on later. On the drive back, everything seemed back to normal. Cars were on the road, people were walking around, and the city seemed alive again. But when I passed by that coffee shop, I saw it was back too. Just standing there like it always had, with people inside drinking their morning coffee. I thought maybe I'd have some kind of weird hallucination or something, like maybe I was still half asleep when I left home. But that doesn't explain everything. My phone was back to normal when I got home. I had full bars, and when I checked my call log, it showed a missed call from my boss at 8:30. I couldn't remember it ringing at all. And the weirdest part? The next day when I went to work and tried to explain what happened, nobody believed me. They all said they'd been here on time and the office was as busy as usual. I even asked my boss about the missed call, and he said he tried calling me because I was running late. But as far as he knew, everything had been perfectly normal that morning. The parking lot was full, people were at their desks, and everything was just normal. To this day, I have no idea what had happened. I still get a weird feeling whenever I drive by that coffee shop, like something about that morning doesn't belong to my own life. It's like I slipped into another version of reality where everything was just slightly wrong. I don't have an explanation, and trust me, I've tried to find one. But all I know is that day reality felt like it glitched, like the world around me flickered and reset, but I wasn't supposed to notice. Now, every once in a while, I'll get that same feeling again, usually when I'm by myself, and everything goes quiet. Is that feeling like I'm out of sync with the world, like I'm not supposed to be where I am? I don't know if anyone else has ever experienced this, but every time I think about it, I get chills. I still don't know what really happened that day, but whatever it was, it still haunts me. It's like a reminder that maybe reality isn't as solid as we think it is. I always thought those glitch in the Matrix stories were just random coincidences or misunderstandings, you know? Like, maybe people remember things differently than how they happened, or they just misinterpreted something. But after what happened to me, I'm not so sure. This was real. I can still picture every second of it, and it still messes with my head even now. It all started about 3 years ago. It was a normal Saturday morning and I was heading to a coffee shop I used to go all the time. I had some work to catch up on, so I figured I'd just grab a coffee, sit at my usual table and knock some stuff out. I remember it was a sunny day and the streets were quiet. There was this peaceful vibe in the air, nothing felt strange or out of the ordinary. I got to the coffee shop, grabbed my usual order, a black coffee, nothing fancy, and went to my usual spot by the window. It's this little two-seater table tucked away in the corner. I liked it because it had a good view of the street and it was a little isolated so I could focus. I started working, answering emails, doing the usual stuff. After a while, I got that feeling you get when someone's looking at you. I glanced up and there was this older guy sitting across the room, facing me. He was staring right at me, but not in a friendly way. His eyes were intense, like he was studying me or trying to figure me out. I didn't recognize him and he looked like he didn't belong in the coffee shop. He was dressed way too formally in this dark suit and tie. Most people who come in here are dressed casually, especially on a Saturday morning. Anyway, I tried to ignore him. I went back to my laptop, but every now and then I'd catch him staring. I thought about leaving, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe he was just a weird guy or someone who was deep in thought. I tried to let it go. After a while, I got up to use the restroom. When I came back, my coffee was gone. I'd only had a couple of sips, so I was sure it wasn't empty. But there was nothing there, just an empty spot where my cup had been. I looked around to see if a barista might have accidentally picked it up, but the staff were all busy with customers. I figured it was weird, but I didn't overthink it. When I sat back down though, things felt off. The table didn't look quite right. My laptop was still there, but my phone wasn't. I could have sworn I'd put it on the table, but now it was gone. I checked my bag, my pockets, nothing, just gone. I started to get a bit annoyed, thinking maybe I'd left it in the bathroom. I stood up and took a quick look, but it wasn't there either. By now, I was confused and a little freaked out. I went to ask the barista if anyone had seen my thumb, and they just looked at me like I was crazy. They hadn't seen anything unusual. I went back to my table, and there it was, my phone sitting exactly where I'd left it. But here's the part that freaked me out. The time on my phone was different. When I'd left my seat, it was about 10:30 in the morning. Now it actually showed 11:45. Over an hour had passed, but it had felt like 5 minutes, maybe even less. I checked my watch and it showed the same thing, 11:45. Somehow I'd lost over an hour without even realizing it. I felt this wave of panic, like I'd somehow blacked out. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself maybe I just hadn't been paying attention. But then I looked across the room, and that guy was gone. It's like he disappeared without me noticing. I decided to leave. The whole thing was giving me the creeps, and I figured I'd just go home and try to make sense of it there. I packed up my stuff, but just as I was about to leave, I saw something on the table. It was my coffee cup, the same one I'd ordered. It was full, still hot, and untouched, sitting right where it had been before I went to the restroom. That didn't make any sense. I'd looked over the table and it hadn't been there when I came back. But now, it was like it had never gone anywhere. I didn't even know what to think of anymore, so I just grabbed my things and left as fast as I could. The weirdness didn't end there though. As I was walking home, I noticed that things looked slightly different. Buildings I knew were familiar, but some had little differences. One place that used to be a bookstore was now a boutique. I knew it had been a bookstore just last week. Another place, a bakery, had a new sign out front that I'd never seen before, even though I walked by it every day. I was so confused and I tried to tell myself that I was just being tired or stressed. I got home, double-checked the time, and tried to piece everything together, but nothing made sense. I went to bed that night thinking maybe I'd just had a really weird day. But the thing is, things kept feeling off after that. Little stuff, like conversations I'd have with people, would sometimes repeat word for word, like I was watching a rerun or something. Or I'd meet people who seemed to know me, but I couldn't remember ever meeting them. The strangest part was a week later when I ran into a friend of mine, Jake, who I hadn't seen in months. We were catching up, and I mentioned the coffee shop incident, hoping he'd laugh it off and help me get over it. But he just got this serious look and told me he'd had something similar happen a few years ago. He said he'd been in a store when he lost about 45 minutes only to find himself standing outside with the receipt he didn't remember getting and a bag of groceries he didn't remember buying. It freaked him out too, but he'd kept it to himself, thinking no one would believe him. Ever since that day, I can't shake the feeling that reality just slipped somehow, like I stepped into a version of the world that's almost exactly like my own, but still not quite. And I know how that sounds, trust me. I didn't believe in anything like that before this happened, but now every time I go back to that coffee shop, I get this tight feeling in my chest. I don't know what's going on, but something about that day feels wrong, like I shouldn't have seen what I did or gone where I went. The part that really messes with my head is how normal everything seems now, like nothing ever happened, but every once in a while I still get this nagging feeling that I'm being watched, like that man in the suit is somewhere nearby, just out of my sight.